This week on the BackTable Podcast.
One of the comments that we got back from people that work in AI in the biomedical field is that they don't know what the AI does. They don't understand it. They can tell you how to program it. They can tell you what the ultimate goals and sort of what the algorithmic process is. But past that point, they have no idea how that black box functions, which of course opens up the entire new debate, right? Should we control it? Because we really don't know. Even the people that design and build those algorithmic processes will tell you we're not really sure how that black box does what it does.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BackTable OBGYN Podcast, your source for all things obstetrics and gynecology. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on BackTable.com. Welcome back to another episode of BackTable OBGYN. This is your host, Mark Hoffman, and I've got my good friend and co-host, Dr. Amy Park. Amy, how are you?
Great. I'm so excited to be here.
It's a good guest, good day, and always good to be able to talk about interesting things with you. And as usual, we have a great guest, Dr. Vadim Morozov, who is a minimally invasive gynecologic surgeon at MedStar in Washington, D.C., and we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and gynecologic surgery. Vadim, how are you?
Good, Mark. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you, Amy.
Good to see you.
So you guys worked together, right? At one point?
Yeah.
Yeah, for at least 3-4 years.
Yep. Vadim and I were partners.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark.
Like we like to do for our listeners, a lot of us know who you are, but it's always good for our guests to introduce themselves, talk about yourself, your practice, and how did you get to where you are in your current position?
Well, I was born many, many years ago in the Soviet Union at the time, actually, Republic of Belarus. Usually I say I'm Russian because it's easier to explain rather than saying what a Belarus is. But at the age of 23, my family moved to the United States. I did the medical school in Russia, almost, haven't finished it, and had to start over again because I didn't have a diploma. So I had to go back to college, get my bachelor's, and then took the MCAT. I know, Mark, you're shaking a head. Yeah, that was a long road. And then went to med school in the States, in upstate New York, Syracuse, and got my MD at the time. Went to residency, Long Island Jewish at the time. That was part of a yeshiva university. I think now it's part of Northwell, if I'm not mistaken. Did my residency there and then did a fellowship in minimally invasive gynecologic surgery in Northside, Atlanta, Georgia, with Sina Najat, one of the Najat brothers who pioneered laparoscopic minimally invasive gynecologic surgery. After that, I joined University of Maryland and worked there as a faculty for about 8 years and got recruited to MedStar Washington Hospital Center in 2017. So since that time, I've been there. We opened up the fellowship in minimally invasive gynecology. I became a director of the fellowship in MIGS. So we are in our 6th year and technically probably one of the most competitive fellowships in the country. Super proud of what we've done. We've graduated the fellows that we're so proud. It's like seeing your own children grow up and spread their wings and see what they do. So it's a great sense of accomplishment. Been heavily involved in the AGL, of course. I'm currently the president of the foundation of the AGL. Luckily, it's only 1 year. So next year, my plate's going to get better. And we're going to talk about artificial intelligence today. So how it's all started. Obviously, I have no training in AI, being a gynecologist, but about a year and a half ago, one of the big companies, well-known company, came to me and asked me to help them to develop the algorithm for the GYN procedures, like myomectomy, robotic. They were looking at the robotic procedures, robotic myomectomy, robotic hysterectomy, robotic endometriosis, and they were designing literally algorithmic steps to train their robotic AI to sort of recognize the steps and help surgeons use them. And that's how I got involved. I started sort of doing a little bit of research and seeing what the AI does. I had until about a year and a half ago, I was clueless, literally. I mean, I knew what the AI was in general terms, but I had no clue what it actually means as far as what does it mean to us as surgeons, as doctors, as physicians. And I started doing the research and I kind of dug into the whole thing. And just about this October, I was honored to present to MIT at the AI in gynecologic surgery and open endoscopy forum. And I swear to you, my first sentence that I said, I really, really apologize, guys, to you that of all the people, I'm the one telling you about the AI because you are actually people that design it, right? So, but what I told them is how AI becomes applicable to us without going too much, obviously, what it means and what the nuts and bolts of the AI. And having said that, one of the comments that we got back from people that work in AI in the biomedical field is that they don't know what the AI does. They don't understand it. They can tell you how to program it. They can tell you what the ultimate goals and sort of what the algorithmic process is. But past that point, they have no idea how that black box functions, which of course opens up the entire new debate, right? Should we control it? Because we really don't know. Even the people that design and build those algorithmic processes will tell you we're not really sure how that black box does what it does.
Well, I don't think you're going to be providing me with any reassurance from this from this conversation about AI. But for our listeners and for people like me who have seen like the Terminator and the Matrix, but that's about the extent of my AI knowledge. Explain what artificial intelligence is, because I understand there's a few different ways that I guess a few different modalities for how an AI works. But I guess at a very basic level, what is it?
We want to start with terminology. I think most people misinterpret what the terminology of AI. AI, by definition, in the strict terms, is a study of algorithm. That's what AI means, if you want to look it up. There are so many different AIs. Obviously, we surgeons, so we focus on the AI in medicine. But the most interesting AI right now, and you probably hear it, it's called artificial general intelligence, so AGI, or general artificial, GAI. That's the term that applies to what, Mark, you were saying. This is where the AI can start making decision on its own without a supervision of the human being, right? The most simple AI process would be you have a lot of data that's coming to you, whether it's a surgery or anything else, technological field, and somebody, like a person, sits there and looks at data and filters it, literally pushes a button. That's an apple, that's an apple, that's an orange, that's an apple, that's an orange, that's an apple, right? And that's how you separate oranges from apples. Eventually, AI can learn probably to do it by itself, but it does make a mistake. So this is where we are. We have some sort of artificial intelligence algorithm that are semi-capable of making independent decisions, and yet they always require a human being to provide the feedback loop, to say, okay, whatever you decided seems to be all right. Or if not, okay, that's a mistake, go back and look at that again. And I think as long as we stay in that realm where we have control over it as a human being, as a physician, I don't think the Terminator will ever come to life in that respect, right? Because there's always a person somewhere that can make this critical decision. Having said that, there's a big push from a lot of companies. I'm sure you heard it, Microsoft, Google, whoever. They are pushing more and more for that general artificial intelligence, where the AI actually learns from its own mistakes, right? There's a closed feedback loop mechanism, a punishment and a reward association. So in the beginning, yes, there's a human being that says, oh, apple, apple, orange, orange. Eventually, the system learns to recognize it. And if it makes the mistake, there is a artificial punishment. And if actually the whole process is good, all oranges are oranges and all apples are apples, it gets artificial reward. That's where it gets kind of a little unsettling, in my opinion. Right? Again, obviously, we're talking AI in medicine. We're not talking about nuclear warheads. We're not in that field. But you could, in theory, imagine where the computer, the software, the AI, makes an ultimate decision without even asking you, what do you think about it?
So the difference is, one is still, it's like an algorithm that humans control, and then the other one is the generative one that can be more creative and generate.
It can generate its own ideas based on what it feels is a correct answer. The scary part, as I was trying to explain, the AI engineers sometimes don't understand how that black box comes to that conclusion.
I also have no computer programming or algorithmic expertise at all, but I do know that all the data, the large language models, it's just built on all this data and, consuming data, and there's these theories that the more data, you have to feed more data in order for it to get better. And then, the data can also be biased, right? So that is perpetuating all the biases that are out there on the internet or wherever they're accessing.
Well, the data is human created, and humans are biased, and we're feeding it biased information. It learns just like kids learn how to be prejudiced from their parents. These computers are learning what
History
we're teaching
books.
them, in a sense.
Yeah.
Garbage in, garbage out. That's exactly what it is. I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you ask the AI to write the essay about Barack Obama. I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican. We're not going to go over it, right? So what AI does, it goes and searches the web, right? And collects all this information about Barack Obama that exists on the web. Of course, it's going to pick up that he was the senator from Illinois and that he was a community, which is all true. And then it's going to pick up all the garbage, that Michelle Obama is actually a man, right? Which circulates on the internet, that Barack Obama is like this Muslim from this country. And, so whatever stuff is on the internet available about Barack Obama will be used to create that ad. There's no way to control it.
So it takes a certain level of discernment beyond just gathering loads and loads of data to understand. If it's pure volume, there's voluminous amounts of garbage on the internet, and it would be hard, I think, for any algorithm to try to tell the difference. And that's where I think a lot of these algorithms are putting things out in front of people, from whether it's social media or other sources. And so that's, I guess, leads to my next question is what are ways right now, we think about things like, social media, what are ways that artificial intelligence is already being used in our lives, not even just in medicine, but like in the world right now, besides like ChatGPT, so we can, save some time writing our term papers and things. But
well, a good example, the most simple one is the one that you use every day. You don't even realize. It's called federated learning. And the federated learning is where massive amount of data and information gets collected and then fed to a specific user based on that particular user experience. The best example is your Waze or Google Maps. This is what it does, right? So you say, I want to get from point A to point B. The Waze then takes all this amount of information, where the traffic are, where the accident happened, what roads are closed, how you're driving, because it actually takes into account your personal driving habits. And then based on all this information that are fed specific to you, to your route, you will get the best route possible to reach point B from point A, right? That's a federated learning. That's a technical description of it. It's not inconceivable, at least in surgery, to think that you're doing a hysterectomy, for example, as a gynecologist, right? Maybe about 1,000 other gynecologists doing a hysterectomy in the world at the same time. It's not wrong to think that the AI will be collecting all this data, about 1,000 procedures at the same time, and give you information, say, well, I think in this particular case, maybe taking down the round ligament should be your next step, based on what the artificial intelligence seeing what other people are doing in the same procedure. It's not going to force your hand, right? We're still deciding what we want to do, but it will make suggestions to you. It's like Waze, right? The Waze is not going to drive for you. You can change the route. You don't have to go that blue line, make a left. And it's going to recalculate based on what you need to do, but it will make a suggestion because based on the current information, that's the best next step. The same true about the surgery.
Yeah, I think it's just everywhere. My Google homepage, it does tailor. I do click on a lot of that stuff when it comes up on my phone. I get distracted. I'm like, oh, I do want to read this article, or TikTok, the algorithm, the Instagram. These algorithms are really good. They know what to serve up in terms of ads, EKGs, and then radiology is in fear of AI. The interpretations always are outperforming.
Yeah, the new studies that came out on radiology saying that AI is actually better at detecting breast cancer and reading the films and CAT scans than live radiologists.
But of course it is, right? Why would we think it wouldn't be? I think one of the big questions I had for you and for Amy with all this is this idea that we are better, that our brains work better, that our reflexes are better than what we can build. I mean, I think about the, self-driving cars, and there've been, a couple accidents and people freak out, but like humans cause way more accidents every day than the few that have been by, self-driving cars. But it's that trust. It's the letting go of control.
You're 100% correct. I asked that question when we get to the conclusion of my lecture at MIT. I asked the question, how many people in the audience will let AI to do their surgeries or trust with their lives? There were 0 hands, right? So at that, and it was just about 6 months ago, 0. Then my next question I said, how many of you are driving the autonomous Tesla? And maybe about a half of people raised their hand, right? So I said,
it's a lot of Teslas.
Well, it's also Boston, right? And MIT. So I said, you trusting your life to the AI while you eat your sandwich in a Tesla, and yet we have this big issue of letting AI make a medical or surgical decision.
They trust the car more than they trust themselves, but they don't trust the AI more than they trust a stranger.
Correct. That was an outcome, right? So that was very interesting dilemma that I found that, and I guess it's all social, of course, influence, right? So people do have fear of the unknown, right? So an AI in surgery and medicine is unknown, right? We don't know what it does. We're not sure who controls what. We don't know how it makes the decisions. People kind of know what the Tesla does, right? Well, at least they think they know. Although, again, coming back to what I said before, no one really knows. It makes a decision kind of on its own sometimes. But that was an interesting conclusion of the lecture. So we get in there, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. We don't even recognize sometimes. Like any Google search that you do is, of course, nowadays AI generated, right? Everything.
Sending a text on your iPhone,
right,
or writing an email in Outlook, it will start to finish your sentences for you based on what it thinks you're talking about.
Right. Again, not inconceivable to think that in the next 15, 20, 25, 30 years, something like that could happen in surgery and medicine, right? You start doing a case and you begin step number 1 and 2 and 3, but AI kind of suggests what the next step should be. And it's not going to slap your hand. I don't think we're ever going to get to that point, perhaps not, but it's going to maybe red flag that say, no, you're getting too close to things that you shouldn't be getting too close.
I guess the way I understand, I mean, having, researched and given talks on error in medicine and all those things and failure in medicine, understanding our rates of failure, I mean, even compared to like the U.S. Postal Service or like the airline industry, we're like 1,000 times more error prone than these things that we use. Like we can say what we want about the U.S. Postal Service, but they make us look like we're walking around with blindfolds on. It's incredibly efficient and incredibly successful in its error rate is incredibly small. The number of letters you get that are to the wrong address. But to me, in medicine, like I would be shocked if it didn't do that in 20 or 30 years based on what I understand about human error and all the decisions that we make and all the mistakes that we allow ourselves to make.
I mean, look how far robotics, and again, I'm not advocating for robots. It's outside of this talk, but look how far robotics has gone. Right? It was approved in 2004, 2007, 2004 urology, 2007 gynecology. And it's 15 years later, 16 years later, whatever. And it's everywhere, right? So the next logical step would be that it's not just a robotic procedure, but it's an AI-driven robotic procedure.
Well, it's not technically a robot, right? It's fly-by-wire.
Right. Yeah, we know. Right?
But it becoming an actual robot is, to me, the next step where it makes decisions. You program it enough to go, it's probably better than me at some point down the road.
Hopkins just published a study, Johns Hopkins, of course, published a study where they claim it was a fully AI robotic procedure where the robot was making the intestinal anastomosis and actually suturing intestines back to back. There was actually a surgeon sitting on the other end, which will okay in it or not okay in it. So if the anastomosis looks great and the surgeon likes it, then the okay was pushed. And if it doesn't look good, the surgeon will say it's not okay. And the robot will go back and perform another anastomosis. Right? So this is where it starts learning from its own mistake.
This is in a human, or this is like in an animal model?
It's in an animal. It was in a porcine model. But again, this is and Hopkins always been on the forefront of robotics. That's their purview. But they get in there. They actually get into the point where the entire procedure was done without human intervention. What the human did at the end, either okayed or didn't okay, but there was no involvement as far as suturing itself. The robot did the whole thing.
And you're telling me a robot couldn't see endometriosis or endometrial hyperplasia in hysteroscopy better than us? Like,
oh, I'm sure.
Of course it can.
Yeah. I totally see in GYN world colposcopy, cervical dysplasia, anything that's pictorial oriented will go first. Right? We were talking about radiologists. Dermatology would be the next, right? Because why? All you have to do is snap the picture of that mole. And I'm sure the AI can tell you way better if that's melanoma or cancer than a human being.
I totally agree, because my husband gets medical photography, and like he has just atypical moles everywhere. And how are you supposed to tell the diameter and ABCD and like a color change? Like, nobody's that good. Like, you see each other like every 6 months, and then the photography, like, it's like just so difficult. I actually thought that a long time ago too. And then pathology specimens, I mean, like the cytology, all that stuff. I mean, it's like very subjective, and where you happen to slice it and, you know, all that stuff. I mean, the prep is one thing, but just on the slides, like per high power field.
And I'll go one further. AI is unbiased. So they just published at UK, the OB group. There's an AI company that is looking at ultrasounds, and just, you know, they fed it boatloads of ultrasound data, and then did their obstetric outcomes for predicting preterm labor, and it works. And they're finding things like ovarian size, right? Things that we weren't even looking at. It's looking at things that, because it's not like, oh, let me look at the cervix because that's where I think the problem would be. It's looking at every single pixel, every single scale of, you know, white to gray and everything in between, and things that our eyes cannot pick up. I look at 100 ultrasounds a week, and I'm getting better where I just, you know, normal, not normal. You know, yes, you get that, but AI is doing that 1,000,000 times a second, and its memory is perfect, and it's got all the outcomes data immediately at its fingertips in ways that we just can't compete.
There was a good obstetrical study. Obviously, I don't do obstetrics, but like the study called BUMP, and I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but obviously it was. So they were looking at the multiple data points in pregnancy, and they were able to predict preterm labor and preeclampsia even in the first trimester, right? Before it manifests, there were no signs, no blood pressure, no proteinuria, nothing, just placental flow, ultrasound measurements, and a whole bunch of biomarkers taken together, and they were like 98% specific and sensitive in predicting what's going to happen in third trimester.
That's amazing. I feel like fetal heart tracing is also ripe for this, but creating these models is so interesting. I mean, there's like so many applications. We saw this AI in gynecology or OBGYN talk, and even just the mundane tasks of like generating AI responses to patient queries, to creating chatbots, you know, to writing letters of recommendation. I was just giving the subspecialty oral boards, and oh my gosh, people said it has revolutionized their lives. Like, you know, using ChatGPT to write letters of rec and all these applications. And then, I mean, like, I wonder what's going to happen with our kids. Like, are they going to be able to write? Because what comes out of ChatGPT is so good. I mean, I know we're talking about ChatGPT as one flavor of the AI,
right?
But
it's one that most of us have heard about and can understand and imagine using in our lives, like you're saying, though. I mean, yes, it's one version, but man, it's one that could impact a lot of what we do. I mean, writing papers, people are sending papers to journals that are written by AI.
Yeah. It's interesting. I got enrolled into the MBA online study. Go figure out why at the age of 50 I've decided to get my own MBA. And you have to really attest as part of your curriculum that you will not be using artificial intelligence tools in your answering and your essays. That's you, because there's I think it's a huge deal in academia nowadays. And like you're saying, writing papers, they do it better than when we do.
I mean, my friends are professors. They're like, we don't know. We have no idea. I mean, they're trying little tricks here and there, but ultimately they're not able to tell. But that begs the question: is that a skill our kids won't need? Right?
Correct.
It's kind
Doesn't
of like
matter if you
no
can't tell.
one knows
Right.
how to like put a saddle on a horse anymore. It's like, yeah, well, you don't need to, so who cares? Like,
Right,
I'm
that's
not
right.
sad about that. No one knows how to milk a cow. I mean, how are they supposed to live? Like, well,
They're going to be okay. Yeah. There's a little bit of concern, of course. Obviously, we don't want to live in a Wall-E world. Remember that cartoon? Like, that's what I'm afraid is going to happen, where
sure.
a whole bunch of us will be like rolling in the anti-gravity chairs, and the AI will be doing all the work for us, and we like totally brainlessly will watch some movies or whatever, or Instagram reels all day long. But I think what we need to do is, what we're doing is a first step, right? So bring awareness so people understand what AI actually is and what it does, whether it's in medicine or technology or anywhere else, right? So once people understand better, they get a better sense, then I think we'll have a better control of how the whole AI functions. Should we let, perhaps, and I don't know the answer to that, right? It's a rhetorical question. Should we let AI make an ultimate diagnosis, let's say in dermatology? Or should every time when the melanoma or detected, should a live person then go back and recheck it? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
You'd have to do it a bunch and then realize that it's probably not helpful or not very accurate. I mean, you look at the studies looking at endometrial hyperplasia versus cancer, and how the pathologists reader reliability was terrible. I mean, it was not great. So there's clearly room for improvement. But I think that the little light of hope for me in all of this is that because medicine's become so complicated. I remember the first EMR I ever used. Oh, look, we have everything, but it's like, oh, well, you have the Encyclopedia Britannica in your house too, but it doesn't mean I have time to read it all right now. So that's, EMR 1.0, but down the road to me, the EMR is, tell me what I need to know about this patient. So then I can spend more of my time sitting at the bedside, communicating, counseling, understanding whether they get it or not. And all the stuff we're complaining we don't have time for, maybe AI allows us to spend more time with our patients and less time writing notes and reading their records, digging into PDFs and outside. What if they just said, this is what you're going to need? And you go, oh, thanks.
Well, also the administrative tasks, I'm hearing about several people I talk to are using AI to sort through applications. Like the ARAS application, it's like 55 pages. We just, did our interview season. And I mean, I'm not a residency PD, but just for fellowship, going through an application, I mean, half of it is redundant. They format it differently. But like these software programs that they're trialing are just going to do like a 1-page high-level review of all the high points. You know what I mean? And like,
what if your EMR could do that for you, for your patient? That you just walk in like a little note card. I don't care about what they had for lunch in 1974, but I do need to know like their PAP history and their surgical history and all these things. And here's some photos from their operative reports. And you go, oh, that's all I need right now. I can solve what I need to solve with this information.
Right. There is a software that came to us that I think it's called Suki, SUKI, that sort of listens to you when you walk into the room on your phone, and it listens to the conversation with the patient, and it actually then transcribes your conversation into the clinical note. You have, of course, an ability to edit it and delete or add stuff, but technically it figures it out just by your conversation without anything specific. It figures out the chief complaint, history of present illness, review of systems, and like make a basic assessment and plan for you.
I mean, of course, AI, again, I say of course, but like, of course is going to be better. AI is going to be better than a scribe who has some medical knowledge, but not the same level as likely the provider who's taking care of the patient. So you have someone whose level of training is going to be higher than any possible scribe.
I think it's a future, right? So whether we like it or not, I don't think there's a way back. We sort of have to embrace it, understand it, control it to a certain extent, right? So don't let it get sort of terminated to the Skynet. We don't want that, but we want it to be part of our lives. And I do think that's going to simplify a lot of things. Things that now takes time and effort will be effortlessly incorporated in your everyday practice.
Well, I just read this thing about, they're creating chatbots, feeding in resident educational curricula, kind of like up to date, but you don't even have to like read the whole up to date. It was my take on it, and then you just type in the question, you get a consult or whatever, you ask it, and then comes the resident educational resources that have been fed into the algorithm, and it like brings it up. I mean, I was just thinking about, remember that Google got so good, and I personally know people who have diagnosed themselves on using Google searches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with Dr. Google. Like my brother's friend diagnosed himself with right lower quadrant pain with an appendicitis, and then that what is that database for the Mendelian genetic disorders, OMIM? You put in all these the phenotype, and it'll generate a differential for you. Because like all these genetic diagnoses are like there's all these features or whatever, and I mean, I think that's what it's just a refinement of that, basically.
Well,
right?
You heard Elon Musk. I don't know whether you like the guy or hate the guy, but just recently he came up, right? Oh, indifferent. Like I have no, but he came on air recently and said that he totally sees that in 50 to 100 years, no one will have to work for a living, right? Because everything will be AI, robotically, at least basic needs. Like what we do for the living, if you decide not to work, you can just not work, chill. And the 99% of all the tasks will be performed by AI-controlled robotics.
We'll talk about WALL-E. I mean, there's a whole ethical thing with that too. I mean, again, you won't have to work if you own the AI or if you control the AI. Assuming that people like Elon Musk would willingly give the AI away to the rest of society is a pretty big leap for people like me who
have to work for the living. Yes.
Well, no, but just who sees how the world works in a way that folks who have power typically don't give it away, and they certainly don't give it away for free. It'd be nice to think because certainly we could do that, but we could do that now with everything else in this country. We just choose not to. It's always about people with choices. Ultimately, though, depending on what we give AI power to do, is the question, and whether we'll ever have the choice to truly give it, or whether it will be taken away by this artificial intelligence.
I just want to circle back about your work with this company. You didn't have any expertise in it, and they asked you to collaborate as a content expert. And then what did you just feed them with like your knowledge, and then they constructed the model, or how did that work?
We actually were sitting like you and I on the WebEx, and they were going step by step. They want my take on what are the correct sequence of steps in the particular surgery. And then when I was telling them, you can see there was an engineer, so there was a coordinator and an engineer. And I was talking to a coordinator, and the engineer was changing the algorithm. And you can see how, whatever, based on what I'm saying, how they were changing the algorithm. They were building all these arrows and yes, no, yep, go that way. Like, it was phenomenal. I had no clue. I mean, I knew the steps of the surgery, of course. That's where they came to me. And I didn't know how the whole thing will be implemented, but I understood the concept, right? So if you do this, then next step is this, right? If you do the myomectomy, if you remove the myoma, the next step is to repair the uterus, reconstruct it. But it's actually funny. A good example, we were debating, especially for myomectomy, we routinely inject diluted pitressin in myomectomy. That's standard of care in the United States. It's not available in Europe. I don't know, Mark, whether you know or not. It's not allowed. It's like illegal, right? So we had this clash of, because so obviously there were 20 experts in the world. I was just one of 20 people, which is like pretty cool, I guess. I've done okay. But there were people from Asia and Europe, and they were saying, no, we will not do this step. And of course, all United States experts were like, oh yeah, for sure, we will do that step. So there was a lot of, this is what, so it becomes really, really branching out. That's what AI comes into play. So AI will figure out, are you operating in the United States or are you operating in Europe? Because if you are, your next step should be injection of pitressin. If you're in Europe, that step doesn't exist. You go to the next step, right? So that's what AI comes in. And of course, even more interesting, and it doesn't apply yet to medicine or surgery, there's a concept of what's called a CNN, and the CNN doesn't stand, of course, for that. It's called a convolutional neural network, which is a cascading network analysis. So each layer of the decision is based on the previous layer of decision making. A good example in medicine is like, for example, we know that if you had poorly controlled diabetes, for example, or you're a smoker, then if you have surgery, your outcomes are not as good as somebody who doesn't, right? That's kind of a common knowledge. The same if your hemoglobin is low. What they have done, they actually looked not only to take those factors in the decision-making, but they looked, was it done at 7 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock, right? Was it done in the hospital that does 10,000 cases a year? Or was it done in a hospital that does 100 cases a year, right? So, or was it done in a close proximity with multiple other teams? Was it done by male or female surgeons? So they've taken all other factors that are sort of, we don't think about it, right? So, and the thing is like, okay, so maybe if you wait and do the surgery at 7 o'clock in the morning instead of 10 o'clock at night, your outcomes are much better. Now, it makes sense because obviously at 7 o'clock you have a fresh team, a full OR, but we don't think about those steps. And that's where AI comes into play and saying, oops, perhaps, right, obviously it's not going to stop your hand. You can do whatever you want as a surgeon at this point. But the algorithm will suggest, if it's not an emergency, wait until 7 o'clock in the morning, do the case there. Perhaps it will be better done if the female surgeon does it because it looks like the female surgeon have better outcomes. We know that. Kudos to you, right? So, and things like that. But this is where it comes super handy because we as humans are not wired to think this way, right? We wired, there's a problem, we need to fix it. And then it's really hard for us to think of all this extraneous multi-layer decision-making process. We just can't. Our brain can't do this. But AI have no problem doing it.
I keep thinking about, so I read like the Google story like 20 something years ago, like when they were before they became, I mean, they were obviously Google then, but like it wasn't as nearly as big as it is now. And it was still thought of as like a search company, like, so you can like, find out like where to go eat dinner. But the book focused on the data, the farms of computing power that they had been building up for years and years that were like, they were like a decade ahead of the next competitor. Like
they now using it for the Bitcoin mining work. Never mind. Sorry.
No, yeah. But and things like Google Maps really was for a lot of the automatic driving stuff, right? It was really collecting road data and those kinds of things. They just have so much data that they can then do whatever they want with it. I think about AI and robotics. I think about Intuitive because Vadim and I both were in Vegas recently for the Intuitive Connect meeting. The new robot looks like the old robot, but it's got like, 10,000 times the computing power. I'm like, for what? It's the same surgery. I started thinking about this like while I was there, and I've been thinking about it since I left. They're probably not telling us, but that has to be, they got some haptic feedback now. That has to be in their plan. That has to be what they're doing. It has to be, because like if otherwise, it's like there's only so much you can do with the robot that we're not already doing, right? And we can make it a little smaller or whatever, single port there to God. But like, to me, the next true revolution in surgery is automated steps, because part of what they have is Hub, which has software that can review surgical videos and will review the whole video and actually go, this is where you took the left uterine, and this is where you did the ureterolysis. this is where you took the urinary artery and transected it. This is what you did. It reviews your video, and then we'll like put like and index it for, they're saying it for surgical education, which, yes, but they're using think about every hysterectomy that's done robotically. They have all that data. They can teach their robots, their AI, how to do 10,000 hysterectomies a year, or whatever the numbers are robotically. They have access all that data, all of those videos, right?
Correct. And the data is power, right? Whoever controls, like in the past, whoever controls the media, the television, the radio was in the power. Well, now whoever controls the data.
So I think the reason why I left thinking, if they're trying to show me the robot and the haptic feedback, I left thinking something totally different, and not a bad thing. Just that, like, I read the Google story 20 years ago thinking it's done. They have the data. They have the power. I felt like with Intuitive, they have the data. They know what we're doing. They're going to be doing surgeries by themselves here quicker than we think.
Probably. I think we're safe as surgeons. It's hard for me, although who knows, maybe I'm delusional and in our self-importance. It's going to be hard to replace a surgeon fully with a robotic AI. But perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps this is not as hard as I think it is, right? I mean, technically, we're doing the same 10 steps for every hysterectomy. The same 10 basic steps, right? So how hard can it be to teach a robot with enough computational power to perform 10 steps?
That's what I talked to my G1 oncology attending as a resident. He's like the surgeon that I wanted to be, but he had been doing it for so long. He's like, Mark, we do the same 4 surgeries. I've done them thousands of times. Like at some point you just and obviously there's always surprises, but at that point in your career, you have, and that's one person. That's not like a computer who's seen everybody's surgeries.
Now imagine
for all time.
Yeah, take those millions of cases with all the little deviations and sort of feed them in an AI that has enough power to filter it through and make an executive intelligent decision. I think it's future. What's happening right now, the first step in my understanding would be the AI will be used in surgery as a safeguard. A good idea if you get too close to a specific structure to the ureter. So a lot of companies, and actually there's a good company in France, they're working on what's called the segmentation and contouring. There are two processes that they're trying to teach the AI. Segmentation, of course, is, I'll give you an example. If you're looking at the pelvis, the segmentation is that can you identify the uterus? Is this blob of thing that you're looking at, is this the uterus, right? So the question, yes, no. Once you determine that, then the next step is what I call contouring. Right now you identify the blob as a uterus. Can you now describe the very specific borders of that uterus? And if you can do the segmentation and contouring, then you're golden as far as AI is concerned. Because with those 2 steps, you can identify the region and you can identify the borders. And that's what you need in surgery, right? This is the ureter, and that's the border of the ureter. So I think the first step would be once the AI learns to do that, then it will flash kind of a red light, so buzz something saying you're getting too close, right? You within 2 millimeters of the ureter, within a millimeter of the ureter, or you're getting too close to the other structure. I'm giving the ureter as a hypothetical since perhaps you want to get too close to the ureter. You're doing some urethrolysis or whatever, the reimplant. But as an example, right? So once AI learns those 2 steps, the segmentation and contouring, that's all it needs to perform the surgery.
It's lane assist, right? When you're driving on the highway and you're not paying attention.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Like your steering wheel vibrates. If you're getting too close to the ureter, have your hand go and...
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of, because I have a Honda CR-V and it does that, and then you get too close. And then the little light flashes in the side.
Well, the newer one actually will turn. It will actually forcefully turn your wheel, which is very disconcerting. I've had a loaner once, an Audi, and I couldn't understand what is it doing, right? I was trying to change the lane, and I feel like my steering wheel is pulled out. Like, what is happening? Then it took me a couple of attempts to realize that the car is actually forcefully trying to keep you in the lane.
Yeah, I had a Subaru Outback, and this is years ago, and I mean, it was like a 2017 or something, and it would if you didn't put your blinker on,
then it's okay. Yes,
it would let you go. But if you didn't have your blinker on, it would sort of argue with you about changing lanes. And it's right. I should have my blinker on.
Correct.
and I shouldn't be switching lanes without it.
Unless you're driving BMW, then of course you don't need the blinkers.
Right. But now my wife's got a different car, and it's an American car, and it kind of does but it's very much like, whatever, you do what you want. I'm just going to be over here and slightly remind you that you're driving off the road. It's very different in terms of how much force, because the feedback was people didn't like fighting with their cars.
Oh, well, I was just going to say one other thing that I want to just touch on is like this whole thing about the privacy. Like, speaking of the cars, I heard this terrifying story about how GM was essentially using the software to spy on people, and they sold the data to LexisNexis, and it has all this data about like how much you weigh because the seats have sensors, how fast you drive, how quickly you're like pushing the brake or whatever, or like how fast you're slamming them on or whatever it is. It was selling those data to LexisNexis, which in turn sold the data to the insurance companies, and then people's insurance rates were going up for no reason. And then
that really happened in real life?
Yeah, look it up. It was in New York Times, and then I heard about the reporter on NPR. And I think our listeners know, when you buy a new car, there's like 20 million screens and like pages and pages of paperwork that you've signed that you don't know what it is, So you theoretically agreed, but like nobody really knew that this was happening. And ChatGPT too, it's like, you put all that stuff in, and there's a disclaimer when you very first log on. It's like, this is not private, whatever. And that's how all these search history on Google, it is circumstantial evidence that like catches the murderers and stuff. It's like the same thing, but like our privacy is what the data we're giving them.
I want to give you, like, if you have an Alexa, right, in your kitchen, which of course I have in the kitchen, in the living room, in the bedroom, everywhere now, Mark is shaking hand. But if you do, just
this reason.
Yeah.
I have Google.
Stand next to it and just mention suspensions a couple of times. Just talk about like, hey, John, you want to buy suspensions? How about the suspenders and I guarantee you on your Amazon search, next time you open it, will suggest you buy suspenders. That commercial on the side will pop up with a picture of suspenders.
That's why I don't have them. But all I can think now after this conversation, though, is going back to my intuitive theory, and I don't have any like pros or cons. I think they're a company that's done very important things. You don't think they're going to sell surgeons' data to insurance companies?
100%. There's actually, when I did my lecture, my last two slides were on the privacy, right? So somebody owns that data. Somebody collects it, and we lose the ownership. Once it goes into the black box, it's gone, right? We have no control over it. Of course, there's a bazillion of security issues. Who owns the data? What information gets collected? Is your weight, your sexual preferences, and everything else that gets collected. The biggest concern, of course, hacking, right? So anybody, if there is data that it's hackable, forget about selling it. Like anybody can, with enough skills, could hack into the whole database and steal it. I'll give you an example, which there's a robot called Raven 2, which is sort of experimental. I think it's done by Washington University of St. Louis, if I'm not mistaken. It's a surgical robot they've been working at for a while. They actually hired a group of hackers, and they were able to completely block. They launched massive denial of service attack, and they were able to block the access to the robot in the middle of the surgery. The surgeon could not move or do anything.
Could they take control of it and do the surgery? They took control of
it, right.
Or worse, they could like go in there and cause havoc.
Right. The way they were paid on purpose because the security, the company wanted to see how valuable the whole, and it was a remotely controlled robot, and they're working at it very specifically, and they were able to launch this denial of service attack, this massive thing, and then block the control. The surgeon was sitting there, unable to move a single arm, while those hackers were actually controlling the Raven 2. So those are things that's scary, right?
It's very scary. I mean, it's like the privacy, it's the hackability. Like that's why I don't put, those remote lights on my sensors, because like your Wi-Fi goes down, then you can't turn on any lights in your house or your heat or whatever. And then just intellectual property. I mean, there's all these companies, these news companies who are like, you know what, you can't use our intellectual property without paying us for this. But I mean, that cat's out of the bag, And then we're sitting down at the console and giving this data, and it's all for the cause. But it is very interesting.
I guarantee you Intuitive has access, and in their contracts, they get the data, they get the videos. I guarantee it. And number two, we say it's anonymous because it's inside a patient, and you can't tell who the patient is. But, that's how 23andMe makes money. They don't make money selling kits. They make money selling your genetic data, anonymous genetic data. But is there anything less anonymous than your genetic data? And there have been people who've tried to give me a random DNA sample from one of these people. Like they bought it, give me a random DNA sample, and to, I think, a family, they could go back and identify who that person's DNA was, just based on like public information, like the DNA that's out there, and based on the stuff that's for sale. So like, it's all out there. I mean, that's why I haven't done 23andMe, because it's like they're selling it. I'm sure, like somebody wanted it, they could have it, but ultimately, like that data is out there.
Yep. I think that's what we have to deal with eventually, right? So, but again, I like the fact that we talk about it and people are talking about it. There's more awareness, right? So it's not, we know that the issue exists. We know that the privacy issue exists. People that work on that know that there are data issue exists, that we don't want to have a Terminator scenario. We're making those baby steps, right? We're not there yet, but it could unfold very quickly, right? It can reach that critical point, that event horizon, that you can't stop it at that moment. It's already out of your hand.
But do you remember what you thought the first time you tried ChatGPT? I mean,
I thought it was a joke. I was like, oh, and then I did it, and I did a good job actually. I took already a written paragraph, like a statement, and I actually copy and pasted, and it rewrote the whole thing. It conveyed the same message, but it was rewritten completely differently. Like you wrote your own essay just by taking something.
The first time I did it, I said, write a paper about blankety blank, some OBGYN topic, in the style of the Green Journal, using their citation format. Cite your sources and write about, a paper in this topic. And went in like 30 seconds.
Yeah, really quick.
It had a draft. Now, if I wanted to think about you go back and make their shows, because it will lie. The AI will, if it doesn't have the data, it will just make it up. So you have to go back and read it and those things. And I've not published anything or said anything, but it took them what would have taken me like a year. It just took them about 30 seconds.
Oh, yeah. I remember doing the scientific program learning objectives. I was like, can you just put it together? And it was so good for our annual meeting. And then I remember the first time somebody was telling me that he was using it, and he was like, oh, it's so good. He's a radiation oncologist. And he was like, yeah, I had it write something about radiation oncology in this style of Biggie Smalls. And he was like, let's do it for Urogyn. So he did it, and he sent it to me, and it was really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, both of my brothers are musicians, and like that's a whole other podcast recording for another show maybe, but what they're able to do with art and music and who owns all that stuff and the writers and things like that. But I think going back to medicine now, I think the question is twofold. Number one is, what can it do, and what do we want it to do? But ultimately, I think like most things, money's going to be the issue, right? If there's a profit to be made off it, whether or not we want it to do it or not, someone's going to go, it'll be fine.
There's a lot of, obviously, I'm still in DC, and there's a lot of meetings. Politicians are very weary about the AI and a lot of things, and they actually invited me to give them after the MIT. I guess my AI talk was well perceived at MIT. I've been invited to actually give them talk locally here. Obviously, I'm a gynecologist, and I can only tell them about like medicine, what the AI is supposed to be doing kind of in medicine. But there was a lot of conversation about how we control it. What are the next steps, right? So, and a lot of people are uneasy with the use of AI, like generalized AI in everyday, to the point where it gets, it's not easy to get politicians' attention. So if they get together and like ask people to present to them, it's like, they must be really worried about it. That's where we are. But again, I sort of think that that's the future. I don't think we can go back, Right? Remember when the robotic just started and there was a lot of people against it. That was like, oh, that's the gimmick, and the robot will never be as good as a straight stick laparoscopy. And there's still a lot of people do that, but it's here to stay. Like, I can't imagine how you roll back the robotic surgery nowadays, unless there's, of course, like a massive war, tsunami, and there's like no robot, and just your hands on a scalpel.
No, but I think back to my point with the data with Intuitive, like, we can say we want, eventually it will get better. I don't care how much laparoscopy you do. There's no one doing it for you. The robot, it has the potential to do the surgery in a way that other modalities can't. So I think it's an interesting...
Yeah, it's going to start simple. It will start, as you're saying, with a very simple, straightforward hysterectomy that could be done with just some surgeon sitting and observing it. And then eventually it looks like it might be even moving toward the complex diseases with a lot of distortion of anatomy, scar tissue, you name it, as long as it has enough data inputs to generate the next step.
Well, on that uplifting note, I mean, I think it has a lot of great potential, and, those things are good and bad. Like, it's just like, I don't know, this is a totally different topic, but social media, like, social media is good. It has a lot of really great things, like people finding community. It's also really bad for the youth, Yeah, we connected over social media. I mean, I have a lot of social media friends.
I know you do. You're like a social media queen.
I know, it's weird. But I never would have thought that.
She's a celebrity.
Celebrity.
Yeah, I guess. But anyway, it's just like anything else with humans, religion, politics, social media, AI.
It's like, only as good as the people that wield it.
It's funny. We live in this interesting time where it's becoming very popular. So Netflix just a couple of months ago posted the job for the AI engineer. The starting salary they offering? Just guess. I mean, I'm not going to...
$1 million.
You get 900, right? And when people, like, the eyebrows went up exactly like that, they said there's just not enough AI engineers.
Well, it's one of my friends told me, he works for this big consulting company. He said there's paying these 20-something-year-olds like $450,000 starting salaries for AI, like AI engineer.
The other things to think about, AI can write its own code. You can have ChatGPT, you can have AI say, write code that does this or that does that. Like, sometimes being a coder is not even as important as just like using the technology that's out there. But I think, to Amy's point and Vadim's point too, I think all technology is only as good or bad as the people who are wielding it. And I think, if anything, then hopefully anyone who's listening who has not necessarily been interested in AI in medicine, or has not thought about it in this way, maybe this is your call to get involved with your hospital's tech committees and IT, and getting involved in your societies to be that positive voice, to be that positive influence. So not if, but when this stuff, it's already here, but like when it becomes, as it's being incorporated into our work, make sure we're doing it the right way. And so instead of sitting back waiting for terrible things to happen, like, go do something, get involved. Like you're doing, like you're working with politicians, you're working with universities, and that's great. And we're grateful that somebody like you, who doesn't seem evil, I guess we'll find out, is, I mean, you was born in the Soviet Union, so
I know,
maybe this is like a long-term plan.
Maybe I'm selling all the conversations to my friends back in Russia. Who knows?
No, it's playing the long game over there. They use a plant from like years and years ago.
That's right.
No, but putting people who have the right mentality and right character and right motives to make these decisions.
Right. And I think, Mark, you're totally correct. I think the fact we have to be aware that it exists, we have to be aware that it's there. It's probably going to stay, whether we like it or not, or like anybody, like the people say, oh, I'm against AI because of whatever. Well, tough luck. You could be against AI, but you should be able to adjust and make the right next step. Talk to your committees, talk to administration, just like PBS commercial. Be curious, right? Just learn about it.
You can be against gravity, and you can try to say you don't believe in you can believe, you could not believe that theory, but the way to test it out is not always as safe. So I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. It's here. Learn about it as much as you can to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
Absolutely.
We've kept you long enough. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you so much for stimulating what I thought was a very interesting conversation. And I probably won't sleep tonight, so thanks for that.
Well, it's a pleasure being on the show. Thanks for inviting me, guys. It's always good to see you.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to follow the podcast, rate it 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _BackTable OBGYN on Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. BackTable OBGYN is hosted by myself, Mark Hoffman,
and Amy Park.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Josh McWhirter,
Aaron Bove, Nick Shellcross,
Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz, with support from
Taylor's Version Hess and Yvonne Overjinsky.
Show notes and social media by Emma Landenwich
and Lindsay Beecham.
Administrative support provided by Jamila Kennebrew.
Music written and performed by Scott Baby Daddy Hoffman.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on BackTable OBGYN are their own, and do not reflect the views or positions of their employers or any entities they represent.